They say the golden years are meant for resting, for sipping tea on a porch and watching the sunset with the person who promised to hold your hand until the very end. But at 73, my golden years turned into a leaden nightmare. I wasn't sitting on a porch. I was sitting on a stained curb in the middle of Charlotte, North Carolina, clutching a single plastic trash bag that contained the remnants of my entire life. The humidity was thick, sticking to my skin like a shroud, but the coldness radiating from the man standing in the doorway of no, his mansion was far worse. "You look tired, Martha," Gerald said, his voice smooth and devoid of a single ounce of regret. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, the one I had bought him for our 50th anniversary just last year. Beside him stood a woman who couldn't have been a day over 30, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. "Gerald, please," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's dark. I have nowhere to go. My sister is gone. And I poured every cent of my inheritance into this house. Just let me stay in the guest room until I find a shelter." He didn't just say no. He laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the quiet neighborhood. "Nobody needs a used-up woman at 73, Martha. You're obsolete. You're a relic. I've spent 40 years carrying your weight, and frankly, I'm bored." The judge signed the papers. "This house is mine. My life is finally mine." The woman, I think her name was Tiffany or Crystal, one of those shiny names that sounds like cheap jewelry, giggled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Don't be so dramatic, Martha. There's a nice park 2 blocks over. I hear the benches are quite sturdy." I looked at Gerald, searching for the man I had raised 3 children with. I looked for the man I had nursed through a heart scare 5 years ago. He wasn't there. In his place was a stranger with greedy eyes and a hollow chest. "I built this life with you," I said, standing up as straight as my aching back would allow. "I worked 2 jobs while you finished law school. I managed the properties. I made you the man you are. And now I'm the man who's done with you." Gerald snapped. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto the pavement at my feet. "Buy yourself a nice dinner. It's the last bit of charity you'll ever get from me. Now get off my sidewalk before I call the police for trespassing." He slammed the heavy oak door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I stood there, a 73-year-old woman with gray hair and a broken heart, staring at a $100 bill sitting in a puddle. The neighborhood lights began to flicker on, warm and inviting, inside homes where people were loved. I felt the eyes of the neighbors peeking through their curtains, people I had hosted for dinner parties, people I had baked cakes for. Not one of them opened their door. I picked up my bag and the money. My joints protested. With every movement, I walked toward my old, beat-up sedan parked down the street, the only thing the lawyers didn't manage to strip away from me. As I climbed into the driver's seat, the scent of Gerald's cologne still lingered on a stray scarf in the back. I threw it out the window. I sat in the dark, the steering wheel cold under my hands. The silence was deafening. He thought I was a relic. He thought I was disposable. He thought that because I was old, I was powerless. Gerald forgot one very important thing. I didn't just manage his properties. I knew where every single cent was hidden. I knew the secrets he whispered in his sleep. And most importantly, I knew that when you strip a woman of everything, you also strip her of her fear. He laughed because he thought the story ended here, with me crying in a parking lot. He has no idea that this isn't the end. It's the prologue to his ruin. This is just the beginning of a journey you won't believe. If you think Gerald deserves to pay for what he did, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Vintage Vengeance. We are just getting started. Do you think I should take him for everything he's worth? Tell me yes in the comments below. You don't want to miss how she turns the tables. The first night in a car at 72 years old is a lesson in humbleness that no sermon could ever teach. My old sedan, a silver 2012 model with a dent in the rear bumper, became my entire universe. I drove 3 miles away from the mansion, away from the life I'd curated for 44 years, and pulled into the back of a dimly lit grocery store parking lot. The silence of the night was heavy. Every time a car drove by, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I kept thinking about my mahogany bed with the 600 thread count sheets. I thought about the lavender sachets I used to tuck under my pillow. Now, my pillow was a bundled up winter coat, and my sheets were the scratchy fabric of the passenger seat. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my daughter's name, Aaliyah, then my son's, Quentin. My breath hitched. Gerald had spent the last 6 months poisoning them against me during the divorce. He told them I was losing my mind, that I was hiding money, that I was the reason he was forced to leave. He'd bought Aaliyah a new SUV and paid off Quentin's gambling debts. He bought their loyalty with the very money I'd saved for our retirement. If I call them now, I whispered to the dark windshield, I'm just the crazy, homeless mother he warned them about. I pulled my hand back. No, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of being right. I spent that night shivering. Even in North Carolina, the dampness of the earth seeps through the floorboards of a car when the engine is off. My knees throbbed. My hips felt like they were being ground into dust. But as I stared out at the flickering neon sign of the grocery store, something inside me shifted. The sadness didn't leave, but it grew a shell. It became hard. At 5 a.m., the delivery trucks started rolling in. I sat up, smoothed my gray hair, and used a wet wipe to clean my face. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My skin was lined with the maps of 1,000 smiles I'd given Gerald, but my eyes looked like flint. I needed a plan. I had that $100 bill he'd thrown at me and about $42 in my checking account before the joint access was fully severed. Gerald thought he was smart. He thought because he was the big shot lawyer, he held all the cards. He forgot that I was the one who did the filing. For 30 years, I was the one who organized his private home office. I was the one who saw the miscellaneous folders tucked behind the tax returns. I knew about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I knew about the consulting fees he paid to a shell company that didn't exist. I drove to the local public library and waited for the doors to open. When they did, I was the first one at the computer terminal. My fingers were stiff, but they remembered the passwords. Gerald never changed them. He was too arrogant to think I'd ever use them. I logged into his private cloud. There they were, the digital footprints of a man who thought he was untouchable. I saw the wire transfers to the young girl, Crystal. I saw the invoices for the jewelry he'd bought her while I was home cooking his favorite pot roast. But then I found the whale. It was a document labeled Project Zenith. It was a land deal Gerald was brokering for the city, a multi-million-dollar development. Only looking at the private ledger, I realized he wasn't just brokering it. He was skimming from the city's pension fund to finance his own stake in the project. It was a massive, illegal conflict of interest. If this went public, he wouldn't just lose his house. He'd lose his license. He'd lose his freedom. A shadow fell over my shoulder. Ma'am, you've been on the computer for 2 hours. There's a line. A young librarian said, softly. I looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't a sweet, grandmotherly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found the scent of blood. Of course, honey, I'm just finishing up my retirement planning. I printed out 40 pages of evidence. Every page felt like a brick I was going to use to build Gerald's coffin. I walked out of that library and back to my car. I was hungry, my back was screaming, and I smelled like a stale backseat. But for the first time in months, I felt powerful. Gerald said nobody needed me at 72. He was wrong. The district attorney was going to need me very, very much. I started the engine and headed toward the one person Gerald hated more than me, his old law partner, Silas Vance, a man Gerald had cheated out of a partnership a decade ago. As I drove, I saw Gerald's face on a billboard. Gerald Thompson, integrity you can trust. I pushed the accelerator down. Enjoy the view from the top, Gerald, I muttered, because the fall is going to be a long one. The law office of Silas Vance was a far cry from the glass and steel monolith where Gerald spent his days barking orders. Silas worked out of a restored Victorian house in a part of Charlotte that smelled like old money and even older secrets. As I pulled my dented sedan into the gravel driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. My gray hair was windblown, and my eyes were rimmed with the red fatigue of a woman who hadn't slept in a real bed. But I didn't care. I looked like a woman with nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous person in this city. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp glasses, looked at my wrinkled clothes with a mix of pity and disdain. "Can I help you, ma'am? Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said, my voice steady and low. "But tell Silas that Martha Thompson is here. Tell him I have the Project Zenith files. He'll know what that means." She hesitated, her finger hovering over the intercom. "He's in a very important meeting." "Tell him," I repeated. I sat down on a velvet chair, clutching my plastic bag of evidence like it was a holy relic. Less than 2 minutes later, a door at the end of the hall swung open. Silas Vance stepped out. He was 75 now, his hair a shock of white, but his eyes were still as sharp as the day Gerald had stabbed him in the back to take over the firm. He looked at me, then at the bag in my lap. "Martha," he breathed, stepping forward to take my hand. "I heard about the divorce." I heard. Well, Gerald isn't exactly quiet about his new life. "He kicked me out, Silas. I slept in my car last night." I said. I didn't say it for sympathy. I said it to watch the anger flare in his eyes. Silas's jaw tightened. He ushered me into his private office and closed the door. The room smelled of cedar and expensive bourbon. "He's a dog, Martha. Always was. I warned you 40 years ago." "You did, and I didn't listen. But I'm listening now," I said. I reached into the bag and pulled out the stack of papers I'd printed at the library. I laid them out on his desk like a winning hand of poker. "He's skimming. He's using the city's pension fund to back his own land grab. He's laundered nearly $4 million through a company called Apex Holdings. Look at the signature on the wire transfers." Silas put on his reading glasses. As he flipped through the pages, the color drained from his face. Martha, this is enough to put him away for 20 years. This is racketeering. It's fraud on a massive scale. I don't just want him in jail. Silas," I said, leaning forward. My voice was a cold rasp. "I want him broke. I want that girl of his back, in whatever gutter he found her in. I want my children to see exactly what kind of hero their father really is. I want to own the air he breathes." Silas looked up at me, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "You always were the brains of that operation, Martha. Gerald was just the mouth. He forgot who kept the books." "He thinks I'm a relic," I said. "He thinks nobody needs a woman my age." "Well," Silas said, picking up a pen, "the State Bar is going to need you. The FBI is going to need you. And I think I'm going to enjoy being your attorney of record. But first, we need to get you out of that car. I have a guest house in the back. It's private and it's safe." "No," I said, shaking my head. "If I stay with you, he'll find out. He'll claim we're conspiring. I have a better idea. I know a place where he'd never look for me, a place that's going to help me gather the rest of what I need. Where? Silas asked. The very apartment complex he's trying to bulldoze for Project Zenith. I replied. The people there are angry, Silas. They're being evicted so Gerald can build his luxury condos. If I show up as one of them, if I lead that charge, he won't just be fighting a disgruntled ex-wife. He'll be fighting a public relations nightmare he can't buy his way out of. Silas chuckled. Martha, you're not just looking for a settlement. You're looking for a scorched earth policy. He burned my world, I said, standing up. I'm just returning the favor. As I walked out of his office, I felt a surge of adrenaline. My back didn't ache quite as much. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I had a lawyer, I had a plan, and I had the ammunition. I drove toward the east side, toward the crumbling brick buildings of the Oaks Apartments. As I pulled into the lot, I saw a large sign, Future Home of Thompson Plaza. All tenants must vacate by the 30th. I parked the car and looked at the residents, mostly elderly people, families with nowhere to go. I saw a woman about my age sitting on a folding chair, looking lost. I stepped out of the car. Excuse me, I said, walking up to her. I'm looking for a place to stay. And I hear we have a common enemy. The Oaks Apartments were a skeleton of their former glory. The brick was chipped, the hallways smelled of floor wax and desperation, and the elevator groaned like a dying beast. But to me, it was a fortress. I traded 2 of the $20 bills Gerald had graciously provided for a week's stay in a sublease from a young man who was moving his mother out before the bulldozers arrived. Room 4B was small, cramped, and the radiator hissed throughout the night, but it had a window that looked directly across the street at the construction site for Thompson Plaza. I sat in a plastic chair, watching the surveyors in their neon vests. They were measuring the ground that Gerald thought he already owned. They were counting the days until they could tear down these walls. You the new lady? I turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Her name was Harleen. She was 75, with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that had seen every storm Charlotte had to offer. She was holding a tray with 2 chipped mugs of coffee. I'm Martha, I said, taking a mug. The heat felt good against my palms. Harleen, she replied, sitting on the edge of the bare mattress. You don't look like the kind of woman who ends up at the Oaks, Martha. You got that private school and pearls look about you, even in those wrinkled clothes. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. My husband decided he didn't need a wife anymore. He decided he needed a trophy and a penthouse. He's the man behind that sign across the street. Harleen's eyes widened. She looked at the Thompson Plaza sign, then back at me. Gerald Thompson, the silver-tongued devil who's been sending us eviction notices every Tuesday. The very one, I said, and I'm here because I want to help you stop him. Harleen let out a dry, hacking laugh. Stop him? Honey, he's got the city council in his pocket. He's got the police on speed dial. We're just a bunch of old folks and single mamas. We're obstacles to him. He thinks he's playing chess, I said, leaning in, but he forgot who taught him the game. He's skimming from the city pension fund to pay for this project. If we can delay the demolition by just 10 days, the interest on his private loans will balloon. If we delay it by 20, his investors will pull out. And if we show the city what he's doing, he goes to prison. Harleen looked at me for a long time. Then she set her coffee down. What do you need? I need every tenant in this building to show up at the city council meeting tomorrow night, I said, and I need the press, not the big networks. They're in Gerald's pocket. I need the hungry ones, the bloggers, the independent streamers. I want them to see a 72-year-old woman his wife of 40 years, standing with the people he's trying to crush. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. Harleen knew everyone. We went door to door. We met Miss Clara on the second floor, who had lived there for 40 years. We met David, a veteran who used a wheelchair and had nowhere else to go. I told them my story. I didn't hold back. I told them about the curb, the plastic bag, and the $100 bill. I saw the fire ignite in their eyes. It was the same fire burning in mine. That evening, I did something Gerald would never expect. I used his own credit card, one he hadn't managed to cancel yet because it was tied to our old joint emergency account. I went to a local thrift shop and found a sharp navy blue suit. I had it pressed. I bought a pair of modest heels. If I was going to destroy him, I was going to look like the woman who built him. When I walked into the city council chambers the next night, I wasn't alone. I was flanked by 50 residents of the Oaks. We wore red ribbons on our sleeves, a symbol of the blood Gerald was willing to spill for his plaza. Gerald was there, of course. He was standing at the podium, charming the council members with a slideshow of glass buildings and green spaces. He looked tan, rested, and arrogant. Tiffany, or whatever her name was, sat in the front row, looking bored and scrolling on her phone. And so, Gerald concluded, his voice booming with false sincerity, Thompson Plaza will bring jobs, it will bring revenue, and it will finally modernize a district that has been stagnant for far too long. The council head, a man named Mr. Henderson, nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Now, is there any public comment?" I stood up. The room went silent. I heard Gerald's breath hitch over the microphone. He froze, his hand still holding the remote for his slideshow. "My name is Martha Thompson," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady. "And I am here to speak on behalf of the stagnant people my husband is trying to erase." Gerald's face turned a mottled shade of purple. "Martha, what are you doing here?" "Guards, this woman she's not well." "I'm perfectly well, Gerald," I said, walking toward the microphone as the residents of the Oaks stood up behind me in a silent, powerful wave. "In fact, I've never seen things more clearly. I'm here to talk about Project Zenith, and I'm here to talk about where the money is really coming from." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and held it up. "I think the council would be very interested in the Apex Holdings ledger." The cameras from the local streamers swiveled toward me. The red lights were blinking. We were live. The air in the city council chamber turned thin. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic clicking of camera shutters. Gerald's face, once the picture of polished success, was now a mask of sheer terror. He looked at me, then at the flash drive in my hand, and finally at the rows of residents from the Oaks standing behind me like a wall of silent judgment. "Martha, stop this," Gerald hissed, leaning away from the microphone, but not far enough to hide his desperation. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassed, I get it, but this is business. You don't understand the complexities." "Oh, I understand the complexities perfectly, Gerald," I said, my voice projected with the strength of 40 years of suppressed truth. "I understand that Apex Holdings is a shell company. I understand that the city's pension fund, the money meant for the hardworking teachers and firefighters of Charlotte, is being drained to line your pockets and pay for your mistress's condo in the Bahamas." The chamber erupted. Council members started whispering frantically. Mr. Henderson, the chairman, hammered his gavel, but the noise was a tidal wave. "Order! I will have order!" Henderson shouted. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and curiosity. "Mrs. Thompson, these are very serious allegations. Do you have proof?" I walked toward the clerk's desk and handed over the flash drive. On that drive, you will find the wire transfer logs from the joint account Gerald forgot to close. You will find the internal ledgers for Project Zenith. And you will find the emails where my husband explicitly discusses greasing the wheels for this very council. Gerald lunged forward, his hands grasping for the drive, but a bailiff stepped in his way. "Get back, Mr. Thompson," the officer said firmly. "She's lying." Gerald screamed, his voice cracking. "She's a bitter, discarded woman. She's homeless and delusional. She's been sleeping in her car. For heaven's sake, does she look like a reliable witness?" I turned to face him fully. I didn't flinch. "I am homeless because you threw me out like trash after 44 years of marriage. I am sleeping in my car because you used our life savings to buy silence and loyalty. But being homeless doesn't make me a liar, Gerald. It makes me a woman with nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person you will ever meet." The residents of the Oaks began to clap. Then they began to chant, "No more lies! No more lies!" I saw Tiffany, or whatever her name was, try to slip out the side door. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. She knew the lifestyle she'd been promised was evaporating in real time. "Mr. Henderson," I said, turning back to the council, "I am filing for an immediate injunction to stop the demolition of the Oaks. And I am turning these files over to the state auditor tonight. I suggest this council suspends all dealings with Thompson Law immediately if you want to keep your own seats." Henderson looked at the other council members. The political math was simple. Standing with a corrupt lawyer was suicide. Standing with a wronged grandmother was gold. In light of this evidence, Henderson announced, his voice booming, "Project Zenith is hereby suspended pending a full forensic audit, and the eviction notices for the Oaks are stayed indefinitely." The room exploded in cheers. Harleen grabbed my arm, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, Martha. You actually did it." But I wasn't finished. I walked over to Gerald. He was slumped against the podium, his expensive suit looking suddenly too big for him. He looked old, truly old. "This isn't over, Martha," he whispered, his eyes dark with malice. "I have friends. I have resources you can't even imagine. I'll burn you to the ground for this." "You already tried that, Gerald," I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "But you forgot that I'm the one who knows where you keep the matches. Check your personal accounts tonight. I think you'll find that Apex Holdings has a new majority stakeholder. I used my power of attorney, the one you never revoked, to move your personal shares into a trust for the people of the Oaks." His jaw dropped. You can't do that." "I just did," I said with a wink. "I learned from the best, didn't I?" I walked out of that chamber with my head held high. I didn't have a mansion to go back to, but for the first time in my life, I had my soul back. And I knew that by morning, the FBI would be knocking on Gerald's door. The victory at City Council was sweet, but I knew the aftertaste would be bitter if I didn't move fast. Gerald was like a cornered snake, most dangerous when he's been stepped on. I didn't go back to the car. Silas, true to his word, had a driver waiting for me. We didn't go to his guest house, though. We went to a high-end hotel in the heart of the city, paid for by a retainer Silas had squeezed out of Gerald's frozen corporate accounts. As I soaked in a hot bath for the first time in days, the steam rising around me, I watched the local news. Gerald's face was everywhere. The headline read, "Prominent attorney accused of pension fraud. Wife blows whistle." But the real show started at 11 p.m. There was a frantic knock on my hotel room door. I checked the peephole. It wasn't Gerald. It wasn't the police. It was the jewelry himself, the young woman Gerald had replaced me with. Her name, I finally learned from the news, was Janelle. She wasn't wearing the designer labels tonight. She was wearing a hoodie and leggings, looking over her shoulder like she was being hunted. I opened the door just a crack. What do you want, Janelle? I asked, my voice cold. Please, Martha. Let me in, she begged. Her eyes were puffy from crying. He's gone crazy. When he got home from the meeting, he started throwing things. He said he's going to take his emergency bag and leave the country. He said if I don't go with him, he'll tell the police I was the one who signed the shell company documents. I opened the door and stepped back. She stumbled into the room, smelling of cheap perfume and panic. He's right about one thing, I said, sitting in the armchair and crossing my legs. You did sign them. I saw your signature on the Apex filings. You're an accomplice. Honey, in the eyes of the law, you're just as guilty as he is. I didn't know, she wailed, collapsing onto the ottoman. He told me it was just a tax strategy. He said he was setting up a future for us. I'm only 28, Martha. I can't go to prison. I'll lose everything. You never had anything, I reminded her. You had his stolen money and a temporary lease on a man who throws away people like they're used napkins. You thought you were the prize. You were just the distraction. She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara. Help me. You have the files. You have Silas Vance. Tell the police I was a victim. Tell them he coerced me. I leaned forward, my eyes boring into hers. I don't do anything for free. Janelle, you want a way out? Give me the location of the emergency bag. Give me the passwords to his encrypted drive, the one he keeps in the floor safe under the rug in his study. She hesitated for a split second. Then, her survival instinct kicked in. He keeps it in a locker at the bus station. Locker 412. The password for the drive is his mother's birthday and the word victory. 04121-935 victory. I picked up the phone and dialed Silas. Silas, I have a guest here. She's ready to make a statement. Call your contact at the FBI. Tell them we have the location of the flight risks getaway funds. Janelle started shaking. Am I going to be okay? That depends on how much more you can tell them about his friends on the city council. I said, within the hour, the room was filled with investigators. Janelle talked. She talked for 3 hours. She told them about the bribes, the offshore accounts, and the names of every man who had taken a gift from Gerald Thompson. As they led her away to the station, she turned to me. Why are you helping me? I took your husband. Honey, I said, smoothing my hair. You didn't take him. You took a burden off my shoulders. I'm not helping you. I'm using you to make sure he never sees the sun as a free man again. By 4 a.m., the news broke. Gerald Thompson had been apprehended at a Greyhound station, clutching a bag containing $200,000 in cash and a fake passport. The footage showed him being wrestled to the ground, his expensive suit covered in dirt, his face twisted in a snarl as the handcuffs clicked shut. I turned off the TV and looked out at the city. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. My golden years were finally starting, and they weren't going to be spent on a porch. They were going to be spent watching his empire turn to ash. The luxury hotel room felt like a palace compared to the back seat of my sedan, but the weight on my chest wasn't from the high-thread count, Juve. It was the silence of my phone. For days, I had been the lead story on every local news station. Gerald's face, bruised and humiliated during his arrest, was the top trending topic in the state. And yet, my children had not called. Aaliyah and Quentin, the two people I had spent 30 years protecting, nourishing, and loving. I had sat through every piano recital, every flu-ridden night, and every heartbreak. But when Gerald threw me to the curb, they had stayed in their comfortable homes, fueled by his lies and his bank transfers. The doorbell chimed. I didn't need a peephole this time. I knew the rhythm of that knock. It was hesitant, heavy with the realization that the man they called Dad was a criminal and the woman they called crazy was the one holding the keys to their future. I opened the door. Aaliyah stood there, her eyes red, clutching an expensive designer handbag that I knew Gerald had bought her with stolen pension money. Quentin was behind her, looking at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom," Aaliyah whispered, stepping forward to hug me. I stepped back. I didn't do it out of malice, but out of a sudden, sharp clarity. "Don't, Aaliyah. That hug is about 6 nights too late." "Mom, please," Quentin said, finally looking up. "We didn't know. Dad told us you were having a breakdown. He said you were moving money into secret accounts, and that he was trying to protect the family legacy." "And you believed him because he bought you an SUV, Quentin?" I asked, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You believed him because he paid off your debts? You didn't think to come to the house. You didn't think to check if your mother was actually sleeping in a bed. He showed us documents." Aaliyah cried. "He's a lawyer, Mom. We thought he was telling the truth. We were just trying to stay out of the crossfire." "There is no staying out when your mother is being erased," I said. I walked over to the desk and picked up a legal folder Silas had delivered an hour ago. "Gerald is going to prison for a long time. The FBI has linked him to a dozen counts of racketeering and grand larceny. But here's the part that concerns you." I tossed the folder onto the coffee table. "Every gift he gave you in the last 2 years, the cars, the house down payments, the tuition for the grandkids, it was all paid for with the Apex Holdings funds. That's city pension money. The government is filing for asset forfeiture. By next week, the bank will seize your cars. By next month, they'll be looking at your homes." Quentin turned pale. "What? They can't do that. We didn't know the money was dirty." "In the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter," I said. "You are in possession of stolen property. And Gerald? He's not going to save you. He's currently trying to pin the Apex management on me, claiming I was the silent partner. He's trying to send me to jail to shave 5 years off his own sentence." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My children, the people I had lived for, looked at me not with love, but with a desperate, selfish terror. They weren't worried about my nights in the car. They were worried about their lifestyles. "Can't you help us?" Aaliyah pleaded, reaching for my hand. "You have Silas. You have the evidence. Just tell them we didn't know. Tell them to leave us alone." I looked at my daughter. I looked at the daughter I had raised to be strong, only to see her groveling for the remnants of a thief's fortune. "I already have a plan to protect the family assets," I said, "but it involves a choice. You can either testify against your father, tell the truth about the gifts and the lies he told you, or you can stand by him and lose everything. I won't carry you this time. You're adults. Choose your side." Quentin looked at the folder, then at me. "If we testify, will you give us back the money? The stuff the bank takes?" I felt a coldness settle in my bones that the hotel's heater couldn't touch. "The money is gone, Quentin. It's being returned to the teachers and the firefighters Gerald robbed. If you want a life, you're going to have to build it yourself. Just like I'm doing." "You're being heartless." Aaliyah snapped, her grief turning into a familiar, spoiled rage. "You're enjoying this. You're enjoying seeing him fall and taking us with him." "I am enjoying the truth," I said, walking to the door and opening it wide. "And the truth is, I don't owe you anything else. I gave you my life. Gerald gave you a bill you can't pay. Now, please leave. I have a meeting with the district attorney." As they walked out, hurling insults about how bitter I had become, I didn't cry. I sat down and poured a glass of water. My heart didn't break. It simply finished hardening. Gerald had tried to kill my spirit, but in the process, he'd shown me exactly who everyone in my life really was. The revenge was no longer just about Gerald. It was about the entire world that thought an old woman was a doormat. The Mecklenburg County Jail smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed desperation. It was a sterile, gray world, a far cry from the marble floors and mahogany desks Gerald had spent his life behind. I sat in the visiting booth, staring at the thick plexiglass. My reflection looked back at me. I wore a sharp, charcoal suit and a string of pearls. I wanted him to see exactly what he had tried to destroy, looking more radiant than ever. When the heavy steel door opened, Gerald was led in by a guard. He wasn't wearing his silk tie or his custom-tailored suit. He was in a bright orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow and sickly. He had aged 10 years in a week. His hair was uncombed, and the arrogance that usually puffed out his chest had been replaced by a frantic, twitchy energy. He picked up the phone. I did the same. "Martha," he rasped, his eyes darting around the room. "You have to get me out of here. Silas won't take my calls. My accounts are frozen. The guys in here, they know who I am. They know I was a prosecutor. They're going to kill me. It's funny how the world works, isn't it?" I said, my voice smooth and low. "A week ago, you were laughing while I stood on a curb with a trash bag. You told me nobody needed me. Now, it seems I'm the only person in the world who can help you. I was stressed, Martha. The Project Zenith deal was weighing on me. I didn't mean those things," he pleaded, his hands trembling as they pressed against the glass. "I'll give you the house back. I'll sign over everything. Just tell the DA that the files you gave them were part of a misunderstanding. Tell them we were working together." I let out a soft, melodic laugh. "Gerald, you're still trying to use me. Even in an orange jumpsuit. You think I'm that same woman who used to fold your laundry and ignore the scent of other women on your collars. That woman is dead. You killed her the night you slammed the door in Charlotte." His face darkened, the desperation turning into a familiar, ugly venom. "You think you won? You're an old woman with no family left. Aaliyah and Quentin hate you. They told me what you did at the hotel. You're alone, Martha. Even if I rot in here, you're still a relic. Actually," I said, leaning closer to the glass, "the children are the reason I'm here. They've decided to cooperate with the prosecution. They're turning over all the records of the gifts you gave them. In exchange for immunity, they're going to testify that you coached them on how to hide the money. They aren't standing by you, Gerald. They're burying you." Gerald's mouth fell open. He looked like he'd been struck. "They wouldn't. I did everything for them. You bought them. I corrected. And now that your checkbook is closed, they've realized they're more afraid of the IRS than they are of you. But that's not the best part." I pulled a small, folded piece of paper from my pocket and pressed it against the glass. "It was a deed of transfer. While you were busy trying to flee the country, I worked with Silas to execute the spousal abandonment clause in our prenuptial agreement, the one your own firm drafted 20 years ago. Since you were arrested for a felony involving our joint marital assets, the court has granted me emergency control over the Thompson estate. I sold the mansion yesterday. Gerald." He let out a strangled cry. "You sold my house." "I sold it to the city," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "For a fraction of its value. They're going to turn it into a subsidized housing center for elderly women. Your master bedroom? That's going to be a communal lounge for women who have nowhere else to go. Women, just like I was for those few nights in my car." Gerald began to bang on the glass, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple. "I'll kill you. I'll find a way out. And I'll destroy you. You'll find a way to the cafeteria. Maybe," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I'm moving into a penthouse downtown tomorrow. It's paid for by the consulting fees I recovered from your offshore accounts, the ones Janelle gave me the passwords to. Oh, and give my regards to the guards. I heard one of them has a mother who lost her pension because of your Project Zenith." I hung up the phone. Gerald was screaming, his words muffled by the glass, his fists thudding uselessly against the barrier as the guards moved in to restrain him. I didn't look back. I walked out of the prison and into the bright Carolina sun. The air had never tasted so sweet. But the final act of my vengeance wasn't just about his freedom. It was about his legacy. I had one more stop to make. The local news crews were gathered on the steps of the Charlotte City Hall, their lenses aimed at the podium. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. The scandal had grown legs, and those legs were sprinting through the halls of power. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of microphones. To my left stood Silas Vance, looking like the cat who had finally swallowed the canary. To my right was Harleen, representing the residents of the Oaks. I wasn't the broken woman from the curb anymore. I was a force of nature. For 40 years, I began, my voice amplified by the speakers and echoing across the plaza. I lived in the shadow of a man the city called a pillar of the community. But pillars built on the backs of the vulnerable are nothing more than monuments to greed. Today, I am releasing the full Project Zenith dossier to the public. I held up a thick binder. The cameras zoomed in. This binder contains the names of every city official, every contractor, and every banker who accepted a kickback from Gerald Thompson. It details how the pension funds of our teachers and first responders were used as a personal slush fund to build luxury condos while the elderly were being tossed into the streets. A reporter shouted from the front row, "Mrs. Thompson, your own children are implicated in receiving these funds. What do you have to say to them?" I looked directly into the camera lens, knowing Aaliyah and Quentin were likely watching from their soon-to-be seized living rooms. My children were raised with every advantage, yet they chose to look the other way while their mother was made homeless. They are adults who must face the consequences of their choices. I am not here to protect a legacy built on theft. I am here to dismantle it. As I spoke, the crowd began to grow. People who had been cheated by Gerald's firm over the years started appearing with handmade signs. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of outrage and liberation. But the real blow came when I invited Harleen to the mic. She spoke about the fear of the bulldozers, the nights of uncertainty, and how the relic Gerald had discarded was the only one who had stood up for them. Gerald Thompson thought he was cleaning up the city by removing us, Harleen told the crowd. But Martha showed us that the real trash was sitting in the corner office. While the press conference was airing live, Silas's team was busy in the background. We had filed a massive class action lawsuit against the Thompson law firm. By the time I stepped down from that podium, 3 city council members had already issued emergency resignations. The Project Zenith site was officially being redesignated as a public park and affordable housing complex. I walked back to my car, but this time I wasn't driving. I had a driver. As we pulled away, I saw the evening edition of the newspaper. The headline was a single word, reckoning. I checked my phone. A text from Gerald's sister, the only one of his family who had ever been kind, read, "He's asking for a plea deal. He'll take 10 years if you stop the civil suit." I typed back 4 words, "Tell him to rot." The revenge was almost complete. Gerald was in a cell. His name was a curse word in the city he once ruled, and his assets were being redistributed to the very people he had tried to crush. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. I needed to see the look on his face when the last thing he loved was taken from him. "Drive me to the old office." I told the driver, "I have a date with a sledgehammer." The Thompson Law Building was a temple to ego. It stood 20 stories high, clad in tinted glass and cold steel, with Gerald's name etched in massive gold leaf letters across the marble entryway. For decades, that name had meant power. Tonight, it meant nothing more than a target. I arrived at midnight. The building had been seized by the feds, but as the primary claimant in the civil suit and the temporary conservator of the firm's physical assets, I had the keys. I didn't come alone. Behind me stood Harleen and a dozen residents from the Oaks, all carrying bags of heavy tools. "You sure about this, Martha?" Silas asked, leaning against his car. "The city might want that sign for a museum of what not to do." "I'm sure," I said, handing a heavy sledgehammer to David, the veteran from the second floor. "Museums are for things you want to remember. I want this forgotten." We entered the lobby. The air was stale, the silence heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 crooked deals. I led them to the elevators, and we rode to the top floor, Gerald's private sanctuary. The office was exactly as he'd left it. A half-drank glass of scotch sat on the desk. A photo of him, shaking hands with the governor, hung on the wall. I walked over to the window that looked out over Charlotte. This was the view he used to look at while he planned how to take even more from people who had nothing. "Start with the trophies," I said. The sound of shattering glass filled the room. The awards for Lawyer of the Year, the crystal gavels, the vanity plaques, they all became shards on the floor. I watched as Harleen took a crowbar to the mahogany desk I had picked out for him 30 years ago. But the final blow was the sign outside. I stood on the balcony as a professional crew, hired with the very last of Gerald's slush fund, rigged the gold leaf letters. With a rhythmic grind of machinery, the T, the H, and the O were ripped from the stone. They fell through the night air, crashing into a waiting dumpster below with a sound like thunder. By 3 a.m., the building was anonymous, blank, just like Gerald's future. The next morning, I made my final visit to the courthouse. The plea deal was on the table. Gerald's lawyers were begging for 10 years. I sat across from the district attorney, a woman who had seen enough corruption to last 3 lifetimes. "He's offering to reveal the location of the remaining $2 million in the Cayman accounts," she said. "In exchange, he wants a medium security facility and a 10-year cap." I looked at her and smiled. "No, no deals. Tell him I already found the Cayman accounts. Janelle gave me the secondary encryption key last night. The money is already being transferred to the City Pension Recovery Fund." The DA blinked, a slow grin spreading across her face. "So he has nothing left to bargain with." "He has his time," I said, "and I want the state to take every second of it." The trial lasted only 3 days. The evidence was so overwhelming that the jury didn't even break for lunch before returning a verdict. Guilty on all 74 counts. The judge, a man Gerald had once tried to bully in a country club locker room, didn't hold back. "Gerald Thompson, you have spent your life treating people as rungs on a ladder," the judge said. "It is only fitting that you spend the rest of it at the very bottom. I sentence you to 35 years without the possibility of parole." Gerald collapsed. He didn't even have the strength to scream this time. He was just a small, broken man in a baggy jumpsuit, being dragged away by guards who didn't care about his name. As for me, I didn't stay for the cameras. I walked out the back entrance where Aaliyah and Quentin were waiting. They looked humbled, their designer clothes replaced by department store basics, their arrogance replaced by a desperate hope for a handout. "Mom," Aaliyah started, her voice trembling, "we're being evicted. We have nowhere to go. Please, you have the penthouse. You have the settlement." I looked at my children. I felt a flicker of the old love, but it was buried under miles of cold ash. "I've set up a trust," I said. "It will pay for a modest 2-bedroom apartment and basic groceries for 6 months. After that, you are on your own. You wanted to be adults when it came to spending stolen money. Now you can be adults when it comes to earning a clean living. Only 6 months." Quentin gasped. "I survived on a curb for a night and a car for a week at 73, I said, stepping into my car. You're young. You'll manage. Or you won't. It's no longer my burden to carry. I closed the door. I moved into my new home, not a mansion, but a beautiful, sun-drenched space filled with books and art that belonged to me. I spent my afternoons at the Oaks, which had been renamed Martha's Haven. I taught the younger women there about finance, about independence, and about never, ever letting a man tell them they were obsolete. Gerald thought nobody needed a woman my age. He was wrong. The city needed a hero, the Oaks needed a leader, and I needed to find myself. The vengeance was over. The life was just beginning. Gerald Thompson went in a king and came out a convict, proving that the person you look down on today might be the one who owns your tomorrow. Martha's story is a reminder that it's never too late to fight back, and no one, no matter how powerful, is untouchable. If you enjoyed this journey from the curb to the penthouse, you know what to do. You want to see more stories of high-stakes justice and aggressive payback. Make sure you smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Don't let the algorithm hide us from you. Tell me in the final comments, did Martha go too far? Or did she not go far enough? I read every single comment. Thanks for watching. And remember, never mistake silence for weakness.